And before I hand the mic over to Trynia, I wanted to give a quick introduction. I'm so excited to have her here. I was her editor on her book, and she's a brilliant writer. So Trynia has been a special educator, an instructional designer, and director of a college and career access program for youth in foster care. She currently works with Cornell University to create and facilitate professional development for the New York State Education Department Office of Special Education. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Oh, thanks so much, Jessica. And thank you all for being here on a Monday. I see that we are from all over the place. I am based in Brooklyn, so it's 6:30 my time. I'm really honored that you all are spending this time with me. I appreciate you being here. And I know someone had mentioned in the chat that this was long anticipated, that it was rescheduled, and you are correct. It was rescheduled from last June. And actually very related to our topic of talking about trauma. I actually had a death in the family, and Corwin graciously was able to reschedule, fit me in for the fall, and give me that time and space for my family as we were grieving. And it really, like, in preparing for this webinar, it was just a reminder for me of we are all going through things at different times, and our students are always going through things that we may or may not be aware of. Sometimes we all just need a little bit of extra time, and we will all be better off for it. So I appreciate us being able to reschedule. I appreciate you all being here. And with that, let's go ahead and dive in. So just to center us, I know that everyone has probably had a long day. Maybe you signed up for this webinar and lots of things have happened today. So let's ground us in what we're here to learn about, what we're thinking about and talking about this evening. So we're going to be talking about the connection between academic challenges and mental health challenges. We're going to talk about how emotions can either help us accelerate that learning process or might disrupt that learning process. And then, of course, we're going to talk about strategies to help students get on that positive cycle of learning. And so I want to start by launching a poll. So this should pop up for you here on Zoom. And so you're just going to respond to what are you hoping to learn about in this session? And you're just going to pick one. And I'm seeing responses flying in. Some people are saying they're mostly concerned about academic challenges. A few more people are saying emotional and behavioral challenges. And unsurprisingly, people are concerned about both. So a lot of people are saying equally important to me. So I'm going to go ahead and close us out. We'll go ahead and share those results so you can see them. So 66% are concerned about both. This is kind of a trick question, at least in my mind, because there is such a connection between academic challenges and emotional and behavioral challenges. So our emotions are very intertwined with the learning process, and vice versa. How we're learning also is going to affect our emotional state. And that is what we are here to talk about. Let me go ahead and close this poll on my end. So I wanted to ground us in some of what we know from research and statistics about mental health in students today. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because I imagine you came to this session, you're seeing it in your classroom, you might be seeing it with your own kids at home. But I did want to acknowledge the state that we are faced with. So we are seeing increasing rates of anxiety and depression in our adolescents. And even in younger children. This data is from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They administer a youth risk behavior survey. And this data is from 2021. So the adolescents reported, this is high schoolers, 4 out of 10 of them reported having persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness in 2021. And with that same survey, 10% of children aged 3 to 17 were diagnosed with anxiety. And we know that even more students might have feelings of anxiety, but haven't gotten a diagnosis, haven't gotten treatment for that. And I know if we're reflecting back on 2021, we know we were about a year into the coronavirus pandemic. So it makes sense that students were having a lot of emotional distress from that situation. And we have moved in a positive direction, that some of our students are starting to feel a little bit more confident, a little bit safer, a little more used to going back to school and having that structure in place. But we know that even before the pandemic, our students were already having increasing rates of anxiety and depression. So it really is a big concern. You know it, that's why you're here. The last thing I wanted to point out from this survey data is that especially our young women are at increased risk for depression and suicidal thoughts, as well as our lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer questioning students. The survey didn't ask about transgendered students, so that's not included in the data, but they are at an increased risk. So it's especially important for us to be aware that students might be feeling these feelings, and that's going to affect their learning process. And then on this slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about how learning disabilities and other learning challenges can also affect mental health. They might co-occur together. So our students who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, are 5 times more likely to experience depression. 1 out of 4 will also develop an anxiety disorder. For autism, 20% will have co-occurring anxiety, 11% co-occurring depression. Our students with learning disabilities, so students who have dyslexia or dyscalculia or another learning disability, they report 70% report feeling more anxious than their peers. And they're also at an increased risk for depression and suicide. And our students with language disabilities are 2 to 4 times as likely to exhibit behavior problems, experience anxiety, or social withdrawal. So there is a lot of research showing that our students with disabilities and our students with other learning challenges are more likely to experience these types of emotional distress. And of course, that is going to go both ways of interacting with their learning challenges and also with their emotional well-being. And so it's important for us to think about how can we support them academically and how can we also support them emotionally. Our students with disabilities are also more likely to experience stressful and traumatic events, both inside and outside of school. So I know I opened us with a lot of heavy stuff, but I think it's important for us to acknowledge what our students are feeling and take the time to think about the different ways that we can better support them. And I'm so appreciative for all of you being here and wanting to take that journey with me. But with that, before we dive into emotions and learning, I would encourage everyone just to take a deep breath with me. We just went through a lot of statistics, and it is disheartening. It can be, we know it's overwhelming for students, and also it can be overwhelming for us as educators and for parents as well. So we will breathe in, and we will breathe back out, and I will go to the next slide where we have a picture of a baby and a dog. So what better way for us to transition, bring a little bit of happiness and joy into this webinar space. So I wanted to highlight 2 key elements of the learning process. And the first one is neuroplasticity. And so we are all born to learn. Babies are like mini scientists. They are checking out their environment. They are testing things out. They're seeing what works, what doesn't work. And they want to be successful. And that goes for our students who are struggling. They all were once cute little babies, even if it doesn't seem like it in our classroom. We can imagine how cute they were when they were little. And remember that they all want to be successful in our class. They want to learn. And the brain has an amazing capacity to overcome learning challenges. So even our students who are learning differently or struggling in class, the brain has this amazing capacity for growth, even when we look at individuals who have a traumatic brain injury. The brain can work around a lot of times injuries that have happened and be able to find new ways to grow and use different areas of the brain to make up for challenges that it might have in another area. And the other key element I wanted to talk about is, of course, neurodiversity. And this is differences in how the brain learns and processes information. And so even though there's a lot of commonalities in how we all learn and process information, we also know that we all have differences. We might have differences from day to day in how we process information. If we're having a bad day, if we're grieving, if there's a hurricane coming, all of these events that are happening around us are going to affect our learning process. But we also know that some of our students have more significant differences from day to day that are different from their peers around them. So they might struggle more with paying attention if they have ADHD. They might struggle more with learning how to read if they have dyslexia. And so it's important for us to be aware of those differences and figure out how can we better support these students. Okay, so we all know that practice makes progress. And when we make progress, the brain releases dopamine and makes us happy. And we're more likely to want to practice more and more and more. And I want to start, jump into a reflection question to have you thinking about, and just drop in the chat some of the reasons that students avoid practicing something. And you can think about this for yourself. You can think about it for students. What are some of the reasons that students avoid practicing? And let me go over and pull up my chat box so I can see. Fear of failure, it's too hard, lack of confidence. I saw boring in there. They're coming in fast. Thank you all. Frustration, yes, feeling discouraged. Fear of being seen as stupid, absolutely. Distractions, yep, something is new and difficult. Maybe it's not as fun as other things. Yes, thank you all for throwing all of these ideas in here. So we know there's all kinds of reasons that kids might not want to practice something. There's reasons we might not want to practice things. And a lot of this for students who are struggling in school can be based on past failures that they've had, or they have built up this anxiety that they're afraid to try. They don't want to look stupid. They don't want to fail again. We all want to be successful. And if we think we're not going to be successful at something, we're much more likely to just not try or try to avoid the situation. And so it's really based on our past experiences and how that affects us emotionally, and whether that motivates us to want to practice and participate and engage in it, or if we want to avoid it. And so the way that we can look at this, thinking about how the brain is processing this, and this is what we call the amygdala hijack. And so the amygdala is that little portion of your brain that processes emotions. It helps us figure out what to do in different situations based on how we're feeling. And the brain's overall purpose is really just to keep us alive. And so this is what the amygdala is trying to help us do as well, is asking constantly, it's scanning the environment to think, am I safe right now? And if the amygdala and the rest of the brain agrees, yes, I'm safe, then we're in a good environment to learn. Given all of the other things that you all mentioned, like, are we interested in the topic? Is it related to our goals? Then yes, we're ready to engage in learning. But if when the amygdala and the brain is scanning the environment and it doesn't think it's safe, And this can be physical safety, this can be psychological safety. The brain doesn't care. The brain knows that we need social networks, we need social connections, really to be safe. We need people around us to be supporting us. And so if we feel psychologically unsafe or we feel physically unsafe, then the amygdala triggers this release of cortisol, that's our stress hormone, and epinephrine, which is adrenaline. And that's where we get that heartbeat quickening and our muscles tense up and we're getting ready for action. And so most of us, I'm sure, can relate to this. We have felt this in our own body. If we have been in an unsafe situation, maybe we almost got in a car accident or we did get in a car accident, we have felt this happen in our own body. And so to a certain extent, stress can be a good thing, but it's when it tips past this, our ability to cope, that it becomes negative, and it can actually prevent us from doing some of the things that we might normally want to do or be able to do. And so if we go past that point, if we're really in this fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, our learning and our thinking capacity really slows down or it stops altogether. And all of the energy that would be going towards learning has been pulled away and it's redirected throughout the body to get us ready to respond to whatever this threatening situation is. And so our students who have had a lot of failure in the past, who maybe are having a lot of feelings of anxiety or sadness or frustration, their learning is, it's slowed down, or it might not even be possible for them to actually concentrate on whatever it is we're asking them to concentrate on, and that learning capacity has really dropped down. And so, of course, what we want to do is break out of this cycle and help them break out of the amygdala hijack so that they can re-access their learning potential. So I'll leave us on this section before we get into strategies. This quote, we have negative emotions crush our brain's learning potential, whereas providing the brain with a fear-free environment may reopen those gates of neuronal plasticity. So this is that neuroplasticity we were talking about. We want to see that growth. We want the brain to be able to access those learning centers. And if we aren't able to create that environment for students, they're not going to be able to engage with the learning in the way that we would like to see and in the way that they possibly could if they weren't experiencing such high levels of emotional distress. Okay, so with that, let's jump into some strategies. So in the book, I talk about 5 missteps that leave our kids behind, that really perpetuates the cycle of academic and mental health challenges. We are not going to be able to go into each one of these in depth tonight. It's a lot, there's not enough time, but I did want to highlight for you some of these missteps so that we can be looking for that with our own students. So the first one is missed or dismissed diagnoses. So unfortunately, sometimes our students who have a disability or an underlying learning challenge, it might get missed or it might get dismissed as bad behavior or a lack of effort. We see students might be acting out or they're feigning indifference rather than admitting that they're struggling with something. And the student, of course, might not know why they're struggling. Similar to before a kid gets glasses, they don't know that they don't see the same as somebody else sees. All we know is our own experience. And so until they realize and they're given the supports or the accommodations that they need, they might not have realized that they were learning differently than someone else and that anything could be done about it. So similar to what many of you were saying, that the students are afraid of looking dumb, they might just think that they are dumb and not know that they have an underlying learning challenge that can be supported and that can help them access their learning. And the second one that I wanted to talk about is low expectations and negative feedback. And so even despite our best efforts of trying to hold those high expectations for students, we know that research has found that even regardless of students' ability, teachers are more likely to hold lower expectations for students who have disabilities. They're also more likely to hold lower expectations for English language learners, our low-income students, particularly boys, as well as Black, Latinx, and Indigenous students. And further, we also know that low expectations, a lot of times what you're expecting is what you're getting, right? And so it's really important that we have those high expectations, that students know we expect a lot of them, and that they will be given the supports to meet those high expectations. And the third one is ineffective instructional practices. So of course, we need to have effective instructional practices. And the key here is that we know a lot about what is effective for students who have disabilities or who are struggling in certain areas, whether that's reading or math or with paying attention or organizing their things. We have done a lot of research on what is effective for these students. And so things like explicit instruction, things like flexible grouping, things like strategy instruction, so helping kids develop those strategies for their learning process, or organizing, or paying attention. There's a lot of strategies that we can help students with. And like I said, I can't go into depth on all of those tonight, but they are in the book, and there's also, of course, a lot of research online that you can look into as well. And the fourth one is neglecting or harming students' social emotional well-being. And this is the one that I want to spend the most time on in the remaining portion of this webinar, is thinking about how can we better support students' social emotional well-being in the classroom. And the last one on here on this slide is exclusionary discipline practices. So our students with disabilities are twice as likely to be suspended or expelled from school. And this really sets them on that cycle of, if they're out of class, they are missing really important learning opportunities. And we know that our students who are struggling every single day, every single minute, is really important for that student to have all of the learning opportunities that they can. And so if they are missing class time and then they're trying to re-enter the class further behind than they were before, they are more likely to experience even higher levels of frustration or anxiety, or not knowing how to engage in that learning process because they're further behind than they were before. And so we're more likely to see those behaviors continue, more disciplinary challenges, and it really just sticks them in that cycle. And so finding out, and that's why we're focusing tonight on that social emotional well-being. How can we help students so that they're not getting in trouble for these discipline issues? How can we help them learn different coping strategies, or learn the expectations of the classroom, learn the skills that they need to be able to engage and to participate, so that we're not having some of these discipline issues. All right, so let's talk about supporting students' well-being. And so in the book, I go through each of these, and we're going to go through each of them tonight in a broad overview. But I use the acronym MELTS to help us remember these. So the first one is to mind your own mind. If you want a calm class of students, you're going to have to bring your own calm. The students probably aren't going to bring it for you. The second one is expect emotions. So by anticipating students' emotions, teachers can plan and prepare for how to navigate tricky situations. The third one is look for the root and address it. So all behaviors serve a purpose. They are communicating something to us, and our job is to figure out, what is this student communicating to me? What is the root of this behavior? And how can we better support this student? How can we address this? And then with that, we're going to teach skills. And so this is proactively teaching students those social emotional skills, those coping strategies, so that they can learn to deal with some of these emotions and stressors that they're encountering. And then lastly is safety and support. So safe and supportive relationships with adults are key to social emotional well-being. So that is really the foundation of all of the rest of them, having that safe and supportive relationship. So let's go a little bit deeper and talk about what each of these mean. So mind your own mind. So again, if you want that calm in your classroom, we're going to have to bring in some of our own calm. And I say this recognizing the enormous pressure that has been put on teachers, especially coming out of the coronavirus pandemic. We know that we have, and as we talked about earlier in this session, we have students who are experiencing a lot of emotional distress. And of course, that's going to come out in the school. It's going to come out in class. And teachers are being asked to take on a lot. Not to mention trying to help students catch up from the learning loss that was experienced by many students, from the lack of learning opportunities in school, and just the stress of all of that. All of us have been affected, and it has affected the learning that students have done, and the opportunities that teachers have had as well. So I know that there is a lot being placed on teachers, but that makes it even more important for all of us to figure out ways that we can take care of ourselves, because we know that we're not going to make it as a teacher in the long run if we're not able to protect our own emotional well-being. And our emotions are contagious. So what we bring into the classroom is going to be picked up on by the students, just like if we're waiting in traffic and one person starts honking their horn and yelling at people, that's going to affect the emotions of everyone around them as well. So on this slide, I have a few strategies listed off for thinking about how to mind your own mind. In the book, I go through some different activities and questions that you can ask yourself to figure out some ways that you can help for each of these areas. And we're going to share with you a handout a little bit later in the chat, or they might drop it now, so that you have the handout and it goes through a lot of those questions as well. So the first one is protecting your time and energy. I think sometimes this is the most important, especially when so much is being asked of us. Figuring out what tasks or activities that I'm assigned or being asked to do are really draining my energy, and how could I possibly put some boundaries around that, or could I cut back on something? Could I ask someone else to step in? And whether that's at work or that's at home, if you're asking your partner or someone else to step up and take over some responsibilities that are really draining your energy. The second one is finding opportunities to rest, and this is whatever rest means to you. So it could be taking a nap, it could be drinking some tea, it might be going for a hike or doing something active if that's what is fulfilling and restful to you, energizing. So looking for like, what do I think is restful? And I think a lot of times when we talk about self-care, we think we should be doing what other people do for self-care, but it really is, what is restful to you? And then looking for moments where we can bring joy into our teaching process. And so everyone needs a little joy. Our students need a little joy. You need joy. And so always looking for, where in my lesson can I bring in the things that I find inspiring, or the things that make me happy, or that I'm really interested in. And that's going to translate to our students as well. And then the last one I have on here is be your own coach. Of course, it's always better if we can find someone, if we have another person who can coach us and give us that pep talk when we need it, remind us of when we've had successes or things that we've done well. But sometimes we have to do that for ourselves. And we have to make sure that we do have that positive self-talk and remind ourselves of what we've done in the past, and that sometimes, it's not always going to go the way we expect it to go. And we have to be able to pivot or try again, just like we ask our students to try again and to continuously learn. All right, so expect emotions. We know that students are going to come in with all kinds of different feelings into our classes, depending on what's happened during their day, depending on what's been happening the past week, and depending on what happens in the lesson and how they're feeling about whatever it is we're asking them to engage in. So we can expect that. And we also know, as we've talked about, that some of our students are having higher levels of emotional distress. They might be more anxious. They might have feelings of depression. And it's important for us to think about that and think, how can we respond? How can we support those students? And I like to think of it with the analogy of it's like learning how to drive in the snow. And so if you live in somewhere that's wintry, you know that there are skills that you can learn in order to drive more safely in the snow. And it's the same way with our students. We can learn how to have some of these tricky conversations or how to respond when students are getting really frustrated, or they're being defiant, or they're not wanting to engage in the lesson. And so we start by planning ahead, knowing that some of these things are going to happen, and we might need to slow down. And I know that this is hard with all of the expectations that are being placed on teachers to speed up the learning, to accelerate. But sometimes that is going to be counterproductive. And especially for students who, as we talked about that amygdala hijack, if their learning capacity has been slowed down, depending on what they're going through in their lives or based on their learning challenges, it might be more effective to slow down. If we're starting to slide on the ice, if we're in a tricky situation in class and a student is starting to get frustrated or they're anxious, the most important thing we can do is take our foot off the gas. So we do not want to fight fire with fire. We don't want to escalate the situation. We have to remain as objective as possible, try to stay calm and neutral, and take our foot off the gas. And so this really comes back to maintaining that calm and assertive energy. The student is already feeling out of sorts, and so we want to make sure that we bring the calm that can help to translate to that student, help that student co-regulate with us, and try to share that calm with them. We also don't want to oversteer. So if you're slipping on the ice and you jerk that wheel too fast, you are more likely to spin out. And so the same with students. To regain control of a situation, paradoxically, we really have to give up some of the control. So a student is already feeling out of control, and what they need is a way to regain control, to feel control over themselves. And if we try to oversteer or control that situation too much, it's going to be counterproductive. So really, we want to gently steer. We can ask them questions, we can give them options, but really valuing their autonomy and giving them that agency over their decision making and over their personal space, making sure to give them that personal space and not control the situation too strongly. We're going to avoid slamming on the brakes. So we know that if a student is in the red zone or is feeling really out of sorts, we can't expect them to immediately come back down. We wouldn't expect an adult to immediately go from really upset to, oh, okay, everything's fine, let's get back to learning. And so especially for our students, their brains are still developing this capacity to regulate their emotions. And it is going to take time, and we have to give them time to come back down, to regulate their nervous system, to come out of that fight, flight, or freeze mode, and then be able to transition back into learning. And then lastly, once we have all come down a little bit and our heart rate has returned to normal, we're feeling a little bit more in control, it's important to pull over, recover, and reflect. And so even for us as adults, we need time to recover. And we might not want to reflect on the situation right away. Put it aside, come back to it later. And that's the same thing goes for assigning any consequences or trying to regroup with that student, to make a plan for next time. You probably aren't going to want to do that right away. Everyone needs a little time, a little space. And then we can come back together, decide what the best plan is for moving forward. Okay, I know I just dumped a lot of information on that slide, and I do want to ask you to just drop in the chat which one of these seems the most challenging for you, or which one do you want to focus on the next time that you're in a tricky situation? And I'll pull my chat box back up. Okay, avoid slamming on the brakes. Yes. Don't oversteer. I see a lot of that. Awesome. Thank you. Everyone can continue sharing in the chat. I'm going to move us on to the next slide. So we also want to be looking for the root of the behavior in order to address it. And important to note that this is not happening when we're in the middle of a tricky situation where a student is feeling frustrated or out of sorts. This is when we are all calm, and you are calm as the adult, and you can really reflect on what challenging behavior it is that you have been experiencing with a student, and thinking about what might be the root cause. So like I said, all behavior is communicating something. It serves a purpose for that student. And it really is up to us as the adults to figure out what that is so that we can address it. And so on your handout that you'll get, and also in the book, I have these questions that we can walk through to think about how we can uncover the root problem. And so the first thing is really looking at, like, what was our expectation? What was the behavior we were expecting of that student? And is it necessary? So sometimes I know as a teacher, like I might have an expectation that the student disagrees, and maybe they're not wrong. Maybe I am having an unrealistic expectation, or maybe it's just not necessary. So really looking at that behavioral expectation first, thinking about if it's realistic, and thinking about if it's culturally responsive. And this is really where it's important for us to have those conversations with students, to think about what do they think the expectations or the norms or the rules should be in a classroom, what helps them learn. And it can really lead to that conversation of them learning what helps other students, and why are some of these rules in place? Why do we have this expectation? And that can really help students to buy into rules or expectations that we have of them, or it helps us reevaluate if we need to be flexible with some of our expectations. So that gets to the student understanding why the behavior is important. And do they truly know what behavior is expected? And so sometimes, especially I know once we get up to middle school and high school, we oftentimes assume, oh, the student should know. They should know. But sometimes they don't know. And sometimes they need a reminder, or they just didn't know it in the first place. And so really being explicit and clear about what our expectations are. And giving students those low stakes opportunities to practice. So they're not getting in trouble if they make a mistake. They're just getting reminded, they're given opportunities to practice. And this is especially important for our students who have disabilities or learning challenges. It's important for it to be very explicit or clear what is expected, and to give them multiple opportunities for practicing without getting in trouble if they get it wrong. And of course, we want to look for if something's triggering the behavior. Is it every time that the student is asked to read out loud? Is it every time the student has to work in groups? So figuring out, is there something that is causing this behavior? We can talk to the student. Although they might not know, we might need to just observe and figure out what we think might be triggering that behavior. And for students who, if you have gone through this process and you're continuing to have behavior challenges, it's important to look into seeing if you can have a functional behavioral assessment to really bring a team together to analyze the situation, to get some ideas about what might be triggering a behavior, and get some supports in place for that student. Is the behavior getting the student a desired outcome? What strategies or consequences have I already tried? So all of this can help you figure out what is that root and how can I address it? And once we've gone through this process, we can think about ways to address the behavior. And so we might come up with ideas for how to prevent the behavior if we know there are certain circumstances in the environment or in the way that we're interacting with that student or that we're teaching that student. We might be able to change some of those things to prevent that behavior from coming up. If the student is experiencing a lot of academic frustration, part of preventing a negative behavior might be focusing on how can we better support that student academically to bring down that level of frustration, so then we can prevent whatever the negative behavior was, and that student can really engage in the learning process and feel successful. And so that is going to, again, go back to that. They're more likely to want to practice, they're more likely to want to engage, and their learning that positive learning cycle is really going to get going if we can figure out what academic support they needed. There might be the student needs more opportunities to practice. We talked about this. They might need extra prompting. They might need more reinforcement. So are we acknowledging when a student does something that meets our expectations that we were looking for? Or does a student need redirected for different behaviors? And so this might be just calmly, if they're off task, if they're chatting with a neighbor, just redirecting them back to whatever it is they're supposed to be working on, not in a punitive way, just in a matter of fact, here's what we're doing. Let's turn our attention to this. Redirecting could also be giving, especially if we know we have a student who likes to move around a lot. Maybe the student needs to run an errand or pass out papers or needs to be given some sort of job so that they can get some of that movement out, get some of that energy. And it also prevents some of those behaviors that we might have been seeing. And then, of course, we need to, once we have looked at some of these root causes, and really even in general, we can be teaching students skills to have those behaviors that we're expecting, to know how to interact with their peers, proactively teaching these social emotional skills, according to research, increases academic achievement, and it also reduces negative behaviors. And so again, the key word here is proactively. We're not doing it in the moment. If we're in a tense situation, if a student is really upset, we have to have been teaching them those skills ahead of time. And then during a situation, we might be able to prompt them or remind them, but it really takes a proactive approach. And we also know that teaching social skills is a high leverage practice for students with disabilities. So this can be a really important lever for them as well in learning those skills for engaging with their peers and engaging in the classroom. And the other thing I wanted to note is that this might be, so I know some schools might have like a program for teaching some of these skills, but it can also just happen in your day-to-day instruction. You can embed it within academic instruction. You're already doing this if you are reading a story with students and you're asking them to predict what a character is feeling, predict what a character is going to do next. These are social emotional skills that the student can learn through academic instruction, and we can really embed that within our lessons. And this is another handout you're going to get. Sometimes we all need ideas of stress management strategies. Our students might need ideas. We might need ideas. And it's going to look different for different people. We all have different things that help us de-stress. If we're feeling really upset about something and we need to take a break, this is a good way for us to think about what are some things that make me feel better. And having it on paper, having it circled or written down somewhere is a really good way to remind ourselves and for our students to remind themselves of what they have identified as something that might make them feel better if they're feeling really stressed out, frustrated, or overwhelmed. And of course, some of these might be appropriate in a classroom. Some of them maybe, you know, maybe we don't want them taking a nap in class. But this is a good way to have that conversation with students as well of like, what would you do in different environments if you're starting to feel really upset or frustrated? And talking about what they could do if they're in the classroom or if they're on the playground, if they're at home, what they can do short term versus long term. And so I know for me, I don't always remember or I don't want to do some of the things that I know might make me feel better. And so having that visual reminder can be helpful. Maybe I just need a snack. Maybe I need to go for a walk, or maybe I could draw and feel better. And so you'll have this as a handout that you can use and remind yourself of what helps you to de-stress, and also talk with your students, have them think about what helps them de-stress. And then you can use that within your class and give some of those reminders or give opportunities for students to take a break if they need a break. And use one of these strategies, whether that's coloring or doing something active, if you can send them on a walk or let them go to the restroom, and identifying what's going to work for different students. And the last one that I will end on is safety and support. And so this is the most foundational of all of them. There is no more effective neurobiological intervention than a safe relationship. So if you remember nothing else from today's webinar, this is the most important. We can all do this. We can all build a safe environment for students where they feel they're supported. All students need at least one adult that is supporting them, that they feel connected to, that they feel like they can go to, and make sure that we're at a minimum, we're not escalating the situation, we're not contributing to trauma that they might have already experienced, and that we're providing that fear-free environment where we can really unlock that learning potential and help that student feel safe, and also improve their emotional well-being, which is really the key to all of it. We can teach them all the academics, but if they're really unhappy, then what is the point? So it's important for us to think about, does this student have a good relationship with someone on campus? If it's not me, maybe it's somebody else that can step in and support that student while I continue to work on my relationship with that student. So with that, I want to have one more poll. This is going to pop up on your Zoom again. So which of these strategies do you want to focus on in the next month? I know I covered a lot, so mind your own mind. So bringing your own calm, expecting emotions. That's that analogy of driving on ice, looking for the root, teaching skills, safe and supportive relationships. All right, I'm seeing us all over. We all have something different that we want to focus on. I love it. Okay, I will end the poll and we will share our results. Okay, thank you all for engaging in this poll and in this session. I think I'm going to turn it over. Let me stop sharing on the poll. Okay, and I will pull up the chat box and we can see if you have any questions. I will also drop my email in the chat box. So if you have questions, you are more than welcome to email me as well. And I'll pull up the chat and see. And Jessica, if you saw any questions along the way, you can also let me know.
I did not see any questions. So Trynia, thank you so much. This was really, really great. So many good ideas and so many more that I know you have. I really appreciate everyone being here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for joining. I really appreciate it. And please email me if you have any questions that come up.
Thanks again, everyone. Have a great night.